It was a quiet night on the countryside farm, the kind of silence that only exists when the wind has stopped and even the crickets hold their breath. The farmer stood near the old barn, his weathered hands resting on the wooden fence as he stared out into the misty field that stretched toward the distant road. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and the smell of wet soil filled the air. It had rained earlier, leaving the ground soft. The kind of mud that could swallow your boots if you stood too long. For most people this place was nothing special. Just acres of green fields and a narrow dirt track running through them. But to him it was home, land that had belonged to his father and his father before that. Every fence post had been placed by hand. Every inch of that soil had been plowed with effort and pride. He loved it because it was his peace, his life. But that peace had been broken again and again by people who didn't understand what it meant to respect someone's boundaries. Lately it was two women, loud, proud, and careless, the kind who laughed too much and listened too little. They were known in the nearby town as Karen's sisters. Two women who thought rules were for everyone else, not them. Their bright white SUV had become a familiar nuisance, cutting straight across his property like his land was a public shortcut. Every time they came, they tore across the crops, their tires chewing up soil, leaving ruts deep enough to break a plow. The cows would scatter, the chickens would panic, and all he could do was watch. He had warned them politely the first time. He had walked up to their car and told them with as much calm as he could muster. "This is private land. Please don't drive through again." They had smiled like it was a joke. One of them even waved him off, saying, "It's faster this way, old man. You should be grateful people still use this dump." The insult had stung, but he had stayed quiet. He had grown up knowing that words didn't fix ignorance, fences did, so he built one, an old wooden gate across the path with fresh paint that said private property. But the next morning it lay broken on the ground, the tire tracks right through it. The sisters had done it again. He had reported it to the local HOA, hoping maybe someone would talk sense into them. But the HOA was run by their older sister, Karen, and she had laughed. "You can't block community access," she said. "People have used that path for years." He had stared at her across the office desk, his jaw tight. "My family built that path. It's not community land." But Karen had waved her hand dismissively. "Then prove it," she said, her tone smug. So he had walked out silently, not because he didn't have proof but because he knew it wouldn't matter. Not yet. Now as the night grew darker, he could already feel it. The low vibration in the ground that came before trouble. A distant hum that slowly grew louder. Headlights appeared on the far end of the road, cutting through the fog like twin daggers of light. He didn't need to guess. He already knew who it was. He watched as the SUV turned sharply, ignoring the curve of the main road, and headed straight into his land, the headlights bouncing off the signs that read "No trespassing," each one flashing briefly before vanishing into the night behind them. The engine roared louder, the wheels spinning mud and water into the air. The sisters were laughing inside, music blasting, their voices echoing across the empty fields. "Faster," one shouted. "Let's see how mad the farmer gets this time." They had done this so many times before, it had become a game to them, a cruel joke at his expense. They didn't see the damage they caused, didn't care about the crops crushed or the fence splintered. They just wanted to feel powerful, untouchable, as they tore through the soft soil. Their tires threw up chunks of earth that landed against the barn wall like stones. The farmer stood motionless, his eyes cold, watching every second, his hands tightened into fists. He could see the headlights reflect off the metal roof of his tractor, the laughter getting closer, louder, mocking. When the SUV sped past his barn, one of the sisters leaned out of the window, shouting, "Hey old man, maybe build a road if you don't want us driving through." And then the sound of their laughter faded into the fog as they disappeared toward the far fence line. The farmer didn't move for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the tire tracks glistening in the moonlight, his jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling slowly. Finally he spoke quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You shouldn't have done that." He turned toward the barn, went inside, and pulled out a large lantern. The dim light flickered across old tools, ropes, and bags of feed. He walked to a small shelf where a weathered wooden box sat, opening it to reveal old maps, hand-drawn property lines that his father had made decades ago. He traced a finger over them, the boundaries clear, the ownership undeniable. He knew his rights. He had always played fair, but fairness meant nothing to people who laughed at law. So he began writing in a small notebook, marking down every incident, every date, every broken fence, and every conversation. He was building a record, a quiet testimony of their arrogance. The next morning, sunlight cut through the fog, revealing the full extent of the damage, deep ruts carved into the field, sections of crop flattened beyond repair, the fence on the far side completely gone, and pieces of their SUV's tire tread left behind in the mud. He took pictures of everything with his old phone, methodical and patient, as if documenting a crime scene. When his neighbor Tom stopped by to deliver feed, he whistled, "They did it again, huh?" The farmer nodded. "Every week," he said. "I fix it, they break it." Tom shook his head. "You gonna call the sheriff?" The farmer gave a humorless smile. "His on their Christmas card list." Tom grunted, understanding. "You could dig a ditch, that'd stop them," he suggested, "or plant a line of thorn bushes." The farmer didn't answer, just stared out across the field where the tire tracks gleamed like scars in the morning sun. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. Later that day he drove into town, visited the hardware store, and bought a few supplies, new posts, wire, and a small, private road. "Do not enter" sign in bright red letters. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. "Still fighting that HOA nonsense?" he asked. The farmer nodded. "They think they can drive wherever they please." The shopkeeper sighed. "Be careful. Those women have pull. Their sister knows people downtown." The farmer gave a small nod. "So do I," he said simply, returning home. He spent the afternoon rebuilding the broken fence, each hammer strike echoing across the empty fields. As the sun dipped low, turning the sky orange, he drove the final post into the ground and stood back, his hands dirty, his clothes soaked with sweat. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold for now. That night he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, the sound of frogs filling the air, and waited. He didn't know if they'd come again tonight, but a part of him hoped they would. The wind picked up around midnight, carrying faint music through the valley. Then the headlights appeared again, piercing the fog. He could hear the laughter before he even saw their faces. His heart didn't race. His pulse didn't quicken. He was past anger now, just cold patience. He watched as they slowed at the new fence, paused for a moment, then laughed, and hit the gas. The sound of splintering wood cracked through the night. They had broken it again. The SUV tore across his field, spinning mud into the air. The farmer stood silently, his jaw tight, his eyes following the car's path until it vanished behind the trees. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by distant thunder rolling in from the west. Rain began to fall lightly, tapping against his hat. He whispered to himself, "You've chosen your own end," and turned back toward the barn, where under the dim light, the old man began to work, pulling out heavy tools and measuring tape, each movement slow, deliberate, careful. Outside the rain grew heavier, washing the field clean of their fresh tracks, and in that darkness, while the sisters laughed somewhere beyond his land, the farmer was already planning what would happen the next time they crossed his line. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that promised more rain. The farmer stepped outside, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The field still bore the scars of the night before, long muddy trenches carved deep where the SUV had passed. The broken fence lay in pieces again, splinters scattered like bones across the dirt. He stood there for a long moment, just staring, his face calm but his eyes sharp. It wasn't the damage itself that bothered him anymore. It was the insult behind it. The way they laughed. The way they treated his home like a joke. His land meant history, family, sweat, and respect. But to them, it was nothing more than a dirt path to speed through. He bent down and picked up a wooden plank. The end cracked clean through from where the SUV had hit it. He turned it in his hands, then tossed it aside and went back inside. By the time he returned, he carried a toolbox and a roll of wire. He began to rebuild, hammering, tightening, and pulling, each nail driven in with quiet precision. But as he worked, his mind wasn't on the fence, it was on them. He remembered their faces, the way they looked at him through the car window. Mocking, confident, untouchable. He had dealt with people like that before. They never stopped until something stopped them. Around mid-morning, his neighbor Tom came by again, driving up in his old pickup truck. He leaned out the window and called, "You fixing that fence again?" The farmer nodded without looking up. "They came through last night," Tom sighed. "You'd think they'd get bored by now." The farmer straightened up, wiping his hands. "They're not bored," he said quietly. "They're testing how far they can go." Tom climbed out of the truck, walked to the edge of the field, and looked over the damage. "You should just dig a trench," he said. Make it so their fancy car can't get across." The farmer didn't respond right away, then said, "Maybe I will," his tone flat, calm, almost thoughtful. Tom gave him a look, the kind that said he knew that calm wasn't really calm at all. "Just don't do anything crazy," he warned. The farmer didn't answer, just went back to hammering. By noon the new fence was up again, stronger this time, the boards reinforced with wire, and 2 new signs hung in the center, big white letters. Reading private property, no entry and trespassers will be reported. The farmer stood back, looking at it, satisfied. The message couldn't be clearer. That evening, as the sky began to darken, he walked the perimeter of his land, making sure everything was secure. He checked the barn doors, the animal pens, and finally the new gate. Everything was still, peaceful. But he could feel it in his bones. Peace never lasted long around here. When he returned to the porch, he noticed something strange. Lying near the mailbox was a folded piece of paper. He picked it up, unfolded it, and read, "You can build all the fences you want, old man. We'll still drive through." The handwriting was messy, rushed, but the words made his stomach tighten. They had been here again, even if just to leave this note. He looked down the road but saw nothing except the fading line of tire marks near the entrance. He crushed the paper in his hand, his patience thinning. That night, as rain started to fall again, he sat by the window with the lights off, watching the road. The farmhouse clock ticked softly behind him. Hours passed and the rain grew heavier. Thunder rolled across the valley, and then, just as the clock struck midnight, headlights appeared again, bright and sharp through the downpour. He didn't move, didn't blink. The same white SUV rolled up to the edge of his fence, stopped for a moment, and then, just like before, the engine revved, the tires spun, and they charged straight through. The sound of wood breaking was drowned out by the roar of the storm. The farmer stood slowly, his face unreadable. He watched the lights bouncing through his field as they zigzagged wildly, trying to keep control in the mud. He could hear faint laughter even over the rain. One of them shouted something he couldn't make out. But it didn't matter. Their voices were the same. Careless, cruel. He watched until the SUV disappeared into the trees and the sound faded. Then he turned and went to his desk, pulling out his old land deeds, yellowed pages with signatures from his grandfather's time. He laid them flat and ran a finger along the boundary lines, clear and precise. This land was his, every inch of it, and no one, not even an HOA filled with corrupt people, had the right to take that from him. By morning, he had made his decision. He wasn't going to the HOA again. He wasn't going to beg for help or call the sheriff. He was done talking. The next day he drove into town, but not to the office. Instead, he went to the old quarry yard, a place that sold gravel, cement, and heavy equipment parts. He spoke to the owner quietly, bought what he needed, and paid in cash. When the man asked, "What are you building?" he just said, "A reminder," and left. Back at the farm, he unloaded the materials and started marking spots in the field with wooden stakes. From the road it looked harmless, like he was preparing to plant something. But he knew better. The ground here was soft after the recent rains, perfect for what he had in mind. That afternoon he dug deep, sweat dripping down his face as the shovel bit into the mud. He didn't rush. He worked carefully, shaping, measuring, creating, every strike of the shovel like a promise. The sun fell behind the hills, painting the fields in orange light, and still he dug. When the hole was finally deep enough, he filled it halfway with soft soil, just enough to look normal. Then spread a layer of straw over it, blending it perfectly with the surrounding ground. From a distance, no one would see the difference. By nightfall he was done. He stood at the edge of his field, mud clinging to his boots, his shoulders sore, his eyes locked on the place where he knew they'd drive. "This is your last warning," he said quietly to the wind, and walked back to the house. Later, as the night grew darker, he heard distant thunder again, faint at first but growing louder, and with it came the familiar sound, the low rumble of an engine, the shine of headlights through the rain. He leaned against the window frame, watching as the SUV appeared again. Their voices faint but unmistakable, laughter, music, arrogance. They didn't even slow down this time. They went straight through the gate, straight toward the same path. The tires spun, the headlights flashed, and for a brief second, he saw it happen. The front of the SUV dipped sharply, the laughter stopped, and then came the sound of metal crunching and a sudden splash of mud and water. The lights flickered once, twice, and then vanished, leaving only the dark, quiet rain. The farmer didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched the field for a long time. The silence after their laughter louder than any storm. And when he finally turned away, his face was calm, almost peaceful, as if the land itself had taken back what was owed. The morning after the storm broke cold and silent. A fog hung low over the fields, thick enough to blur the edges of the fence line. The farmer stepped outside. The ground still damp beneath his boots. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something faintly metallic. He walked slowly toward the part of the field where the tire tracks had always been. But this time there were none. The ground looked smooth, settled, as if nature itself had decided to erase all evidence of what had happened. He stood still, listening, waiting, the usual sounds of the morning, birds, the distant moo of a cow, the creak of the barn, were gone. It was too quiet. He took a few steps forward, his boot sinking slightly into the soft mud. He could feel where the ground had shifted, the faint depression of something heavy buried beneath. He crouched, touching the soil with his calloused fingers. It was colder here, denser, and he knew without needing to see. His eyes flicked toward the horizon where the road disappeared into mist. No sign of the SUV, no sound of engines, no laughter, just emptiness. He stood up slowly and looked across his land, the sun beginning to cut through the fog, turning everything a pale gold. It was peaceful again, too peaceful, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He turned toward the barn, his mind already working. He needed to clean up, not because there was evidence, but because there would be questions. People noticed when loud cars and loud women didn't show up to make trouble anymore. By noon he had fixed the broken fence for the last time. The boards straight, the wires tight, the new sign hanging perfectly level. Private property, no entry, he read the words quietly to himself and nodded. As he turned to leave, he saw his neighbor Tom walking up the dirt road, carrying a thermos in one hand and waving with the other. "Morning," Tom called out, his breath misting in the air. "Heard that storm last night. Sounded bad. Fence still standing?" The farmer smiled faintly. "It's stronger now," he said. Tom chuckled. "That's good. Maybe it'll finally keep those sisters out. Haven't seen them today." "They didn't tear through again, did they?" The farmer shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I don't think they'll be coming back." Tom looked puzzled but didn't push. "Well, can't say I'll miss them. They've been a pain for everyone around here," he said. "Karen came into the feed store last week bragging about how her sisters were gonna buy up land out here. Maybe even build a guest house near your field." The farmer's eyes narrowed slightly. "They were planning that?" Tom nodded. "Yeah, she said the HOA had some plan to open a private trail through your property to connect to the lake. Said it was community improvement." The farmer felt the anger stir again. That cold, controlled kind of anger that didn't shout, just burned. "That's not happening," he said quietly. Tom raised his hands. "Hey, I'm just saying what I heard. You might want to keep an eye out." He paused, looking out at the smooth stretch of land. "Strange though, no tire tracks today, like the storm washed everything clean." The farmer gave a small nod. "Maybe it did," he said. Tom didn't notice the edge in his tone. He just smiled, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Well, if you need help fixing up, you know where to find me," and walked off down the road. The farmer stood there for a while, watching until Tom disappeared into the fog, then turned back toward the field, his expression unreadable. Later that afternoon, a car pulled up. This one sleek and black, the HOA's vehicle. Out stepped Karen herself, sunglasses on, phone in hand, her voice sharp and full of authority as always. "Morning," she said, not looking at him. "We've had a few complaints about restricted access again." The farmer wiped his hands on his jeans. "Complaints from who?" he asked. She shrugged. "My sisters," she said flatly. "They said you threatened them again. You really should stop harassing residents." His face didn't move. "Your sisters haven't been here," he said calmly. "Not since last night." Karen scoffed. "Oh please, they texted me right after they left. Said you were standing out here watching them like some creepy scarecrow." He tilted his head. "And you heard from them after that?" She blinked, her smile faltering. "Not yet," she admitted. "But they probably went to the city for the weekend." He nodded slowly. "Probably," he said. She shifted uncomfortably, the silence between them stretching long and heavy. Finally she said, "Anyway, I came to remind you that the HOA still plans to review your boundary. Don't get too attached to this place." He smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm attached," he said. "More than you can imagine." She frowned, not sure what to make of his tone. "Don't play games," she said. "Rules are rules." He stepped closer, his eyes steady on hers. "You're right," he said quietly. "Rules are rules, and some people only learn them the hard way." She laughed nervously. "You really think you can scare me?" she said, but there was a tremor in her voice. He didn't reply, just looked past her toward the field, where the sunlight hit the soft ground, a faint shimmer of water still visible where the soil hadn't fully settled. She followed his gaze and frowned. "What are you looking at?" she asked. He turned back to her, his expression calm. "My land," he said simply. "It's finally resting." She rolled her eyes, muttering, "You're weird," and walked back to her car. "Tell your sisters to stay off it," he said as she opened the door, "for their own good." She laughed as she got in. "They'll do whatever they want," she said. "They always do," and drove off. The farmer stood there watching the car disappear down the road, then turned back to the field. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint smell of rain and something deeper. The earth smelled rich, like it had taken something in and decided to keep it. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, he walked out to the field one more time, flashlight in hand. The ground looked normal, smooth, peaceful, but he could see small signs, tiny cracks forming in the soil as it began to dry. He knelt down and brushed his fingers over them. The earth soft but firm beneath his touch. "You've done well," he whispered, the words disappearing into the night air. From somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, long and low, and he stood up, the beam of his flashlight catching the glint of something metallic half buried under the surface, a piece of chrome, maybe from a bumper or a mirror. He bent down, pressed the dirt over it gently, and stood again, looking up at the stars. "Some lessons," he said softly, "you only learn once." He turned and walked back toward the house, his shadow long and thin behind him, stretching across the field that was once full of laughter, tire tracks, and arrogance, now silent, still, and buried beneath the calm surface of the earth. The following days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The farmer woke early every morning and walked the property as usual, feeding the animals, checking the fences, making sure everything was still in order. The air had that strange kind of stillness that follows after a storm, a calm that wasn't peace, but more like the world was holding its breath. The ground was dry now, hardening again under the sun, and the field where the sisters' SUV had vanished looked just like the rest of the land, smooth, flat, ordinary, as if nothing unusual had ever happened there. But every time he passed that spot, he could feel it, deep in his gut, a faint hum, like the land itself remembered. He didn't talk much that week, didn't visit town, didn't attend the small HOA meeting that was called, though he heard from his neighbor Tom that Karen had shown up alone, looking irritated, pacing around, asking if anyone had seen her sisters. No one had. Some said they'd gone on vacation. Others whispered that maybe they'd left after the storm. But there were no posts, no calls, nothing. Their phones were off, their social media silent. Karen told everyone she wasn't worried, that they'd show up when they felt like it, but her voice had a nervous shake to it. The farmer sat on his porch that night listening to the frogs by the pond, the wood creaking softly under his boots. He could see the faint lights from Karen's house up on the hill, small and flickering through the trees. He wondered if she was looking out the window too, wondering what had happened, wondering if maybe her sisters had finally pushed too far. He smiled faintly, not from joy, but from a deep sense of balance, the kind of satisfaction that comes when nature finally decides to handle what humans refuse to. The next morning, a white pickup truck pulled up the road. It was the sheriff, a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. The farmer met him halfway down the drive. "Morning, Sheriff," he said calmly. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Morning," he said. "Just checking in. Karen filed a missing persons report for her sisters. Says she last heard from them a few nights ago, right around the time that storm hit." The farmer nodded, his face unreadable. "That so?" he asked. "Yeah," the sheriff said. "You didn't see them, did you? They usually come tearing through here from what I hear." The farmer shook his head slowly. "Not this time," he said. "Haven't seen anyone since the rain." The sheriff looked around, eyes scanning the freshly mended fence, the neat posts, the clean yard. "You sure about that?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. The farmer met his eyes, steady, calm, positive. He said, "You know how bad the storm was. If they went off-road anywhere, they could have gotten stuck or washed out down by the creek." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's what I was thinking," he said. "We'll check down that way. You mind if we take a look near your fence?" The farmer stepped aside, gesturing with his hand. "Go ahead," he said. The sheriff and his deputy walked along the fence line, talking quietly, taking photos, occasionally stopping to kneel and look closer at the ground. But there was nothing to find. The rain had done its job, washing away every trace. After a few minutes, the sheriff straightened up. "All right," he said. "Looks clear here. We'll keep searching. Maybe they just drove too far during the storm." The farmer nodded. "Hope you find them safe," he said. The sheriff tipped his hat again. "Appreciate that," he said, and climbed back into his truck, driving off down the road. The farmer watched until the tail lights disappeared into the trees, then turned back toward the house, his steps slow, measured. That night, he dreamed of water, dark, muddy water rising, swallowing. Headlights, and a voice screaming that faded into gurgles. He woke with a start, breathing hard, his shirt damp with sweat. He went to the sink, poured himself a glass of water, and looked out the window. The field was silver under the moonlight, still and innocent. But he knew what lay beneath that surface. He didn't feel guilt, only inevitability. The next day he saw Karen's car again, parked near the gate. She was standing outside, yelling into her phone. Her voice carried even from a distance, angry, desperate. "You're not doing enough," she shouted. They didn't just vanish. He stayed still, watching her from the shadow of the barn. She ended the call and turned to look at the fence, her eyes scanning the property. He could see the suspicion in her face, like she wanted to accuse him but didn't have the nerve. After a long pause, she walked up to the fence and read the sign, her jaw tightening. She picked up a small rock and threw it into the field. It landed softly in the dirt, harmless. Then she turned, muttering curses under her breath, and drove away. The farmer waited until her car disappeared before walking out to where the rock had landed. He picked it up, turning it in his hand, and smiled faintly, still not listening. He said quietly, "Over the next few days, search teams combed the nearby woods and creeks. Volunteers joined. Drones were flown, even dogs brought in. But they found nothing. The SUV didn't show up. Neither did any trace of the sisters." News crews started coming around, filming short clips for local television. 2 women missing after severe storm, last seen near the Redwood Valley farmlands. The report said, the farmer saw the story once while sitting in a diner, the reporter standing in front of a familiar background, his fence in the distance. "Authorities continue to search, but no signs have been found," she said. He looked down at his coffee, stirring it slowly, listening to the whispers of other customers. "Serves them right," one man said. "Always causing trouble," another replied. "That old farmer told them a dozen times not to drive through there." The farmer finished his drink quietly and left without saying a word. Back at the farm, he spent his evening tending to the animals, fixing the barn roof, cleaning his tools, everything normal again. But that night, as he sat by the window, he noticed something strange, faint light flickering across the field. At first he thought it was lightning, but the sky was clear. Then he saw it again, 2 beams of light deep under the soil, faint, almost ghostly, like headlights shining from underground. His breath caught for a second, but he didn't move, he just watched. The glow flickered once, twice, and then faded completely, leaving only darkness. He exhaled slowly, set his cup down, and whispered, "Stay where you are," before turning off the lamp and letting the silence take over. The land outside was still, the kind of stillness that holds secrets, the kind that never tells but always remembers, and in that silence, he finally felt at peace, because he knew nature had already passed its judgment, and he didn't need to lift another finger. A week passed and the whispers in town grew louder. The sisters were still missing, and every day new rumors crawled through the cafe tables and grocery aisles. Some said they ran off after a fight with Karen. Others whispered about a hidden road washed out by the storm. And a few even claimed the farmer had finally lost his patience. The farmer never joined the talk. He just listened quietly when he went into town, nodding politely, answering nothing. He was careful, calm, and ordinary. The kind of man no one ever suspects because he never raises his voice. But beneath that calm was something sharper, colder. The kind of silence that comes after justice has already been delivered. He knew Karen was unraveling. He could see it every day. Her black SUV driving past his farm at least 3 times a day, sometimes stopping at the gate, sometimes just sitting there for minutes. Her headlights pointed straight at his fence as if daring him to come out. He didn't. He let her sit there and stare at the empty field that held all her questions. He could almost feel her fear from the porch, the way her confidence had cracked. That fake power she once used to control everyone now crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. One evening she came again. This time she got out of the car, her hair messy, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. She walked up to the fence and shouted, "I know you had something to do with it." Her voice shook between anger and desperation. The farmer didn't move. He just stood in the shadows of his porch, his face hidden by the darkness. She yelled again, "Where are they?" Her voice echoed through the empty fields. Only the wind answered, rustling through the dry grass. She grabbed the fence, shaking it hard. "Tell me!" she screamed, and for a moment it looked like she might climb over. But she stopped, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. Something in her eyes changed when she looked past. The fence line, the field stretched out, calm, unbroken, but to her, it must have felt wrong, too still, too perfect. As if the earth itself was hiding something. She backed away slowly, shaking her head, got in her car, and drove off so fast the tires threw gravel across the road. The farmer watched her go, then turned and went inside. Later that night he couldn't sleep. The storm clouds were gone but the air felt heavy again. He sat by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at the land. That had always protected him. Then he saw something, headlights, faint at first, then brighter. It was Karen again. But this time she wasn't alone. Another car followed behind, black and official-looking, the sheriff's truck. The farmer stood slowly, setting his cup down. Outside he could hear voices, sharp and commanding. "This is a search order," the sheriff called out. "Karen filed a petition to inspect your property. Mind coming out?" The farmer walked out calmly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Evening, sheriff," he said. "Search order." "Hey? You think I'm hiding something?" The sheriff looked uneasy. "It's just procedure," he said. "They were last seen near here, and she's got the right to ask for a look." The farmer nodded slowly. "Sure," he said. "You can look all you want." He opened the gate and stepped aside. Karen got out of her car, clutching a folder. "Don't think you'll scare me," she said bitterly. "I'm not leaving till I find them." The farmer didn't answer. He just motioned toward the open field. "Go ahead," he said. "The land doesn't lie." She glared at him and walked out. The sheriff and his deputy followed, flashlights sweeping across the ground. Every step they took left small prints in the soft soil. They walked for nearly an hour, scanning, talking quietly, digging small spots with shovels. But there was nothing, no sign of a car, no disturbed ground, no clue. The field looked perfect. The sheriff finally turned to Karen. "There's nothing here," he said. "Maybe they drove another way." But she shook her head, her voice cracking. "No, no. This is where they always came through. This is where they—" She stopped. Her flashlight beam had caught something metallic, small, shining faintly under a thin layer of dirt. She bent down quickly, brushing the soil away. It was a piece of chrome, small enough to fit in her palm, the shape of an emblem. The letters faint but visible. She knew them instantly. It was from their SUV. She froze, her face pale, her breath shaking. The sheriff looked over her shoulder. "Could be anything," he said. "Storm debris, part of an old car maybe." But she didn't hear him. She looked up slowly, her eyes meeting the farmer's. He stood a few feet away, watching, calm and silent. The wind picked up, sweeping across the field, making the grass sway like waves, the sound low and whispering. Karen dropped the metal piece, stumbling back. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice almost gone. The farmer tilted his head slightly. "I told them to stop," he said. Quietly, "They didn't listen." The sheriff frowned. "You threatening her now?" The farmer looked at him, his eyes steady. "No, just telling the truth." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Let's go," he said. "We'll take this piece back for testing." Karen didn't move, her knees shaking, her face blank. Finally the sheriff grabbed her arm gently and led her back to the cars. As they left, the farmer watched the taillights disappear down the road, then looked back at the field, the moonlight bright across the soil. He walked out to the spot where she had found the metal piece, crouched down, and pushed the dirt back over it with his hand, smoothing it flat. When he stood, he whispered softly, "You should have stayed on the road," then turned back toward his house. The next morning he saw tire tracks again. But not across his field, on the road this time. Leading away from the valley, Karen's car was gone. She didn't come back, not that day, not the next. The sheriff stopped by once. More to say, they were closing the search. "We'll keep it open on paper, but it's gone cold," he said. "No sign, no evidence, nothing left." The farmer nodded. "Sometimes the land keeps what it takes." he said. The sheriff gave him a strange look, but didn't reply, drove away, and after that, peace returned for real. The fields grew green again, the crops thrived, the animals were calm, and the only sound at night was the wind moving softly through the grass. The farmer would sit on his porch and look out at the land that had seen everything and said nothing, and each time he did, he felt the same quiet satisfaction, not pride, not cruelty, just balance. The land had spoken once, and it had spoken enough. Weeks passed and the valley slipped back into its quiet rhythm. But underneath that calm there was something uneasy. The town couldn't forget what had happened. 2 women gone without a trace, Karen disappearing soon after, and a farmer who never seemed bothered by any of it. The sheriff had closed the search, but people still whispered when they drove past his property. Some said he was cursed, others said he was blessed. The farmer didn't care what they said. He kept to his work, his days filled with the usual routines, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the crops that had started to grow stronger than ever. It was as if the land itself had been renewed, breathing easier, richer, greener. The rain fell often that month and every drop seemed to soak peace deeper into the soil. He had stopped expecting trouble, stopped waiting for headlights in the distance, for the sound of tires grinding through mud. Those noises were gone, replaced by silence and the soft rustle of the wind through tall grass. Sometimes he would stand at the edge of the field and look out toward the spot where the ground had once been soft, where he had buried years of frustration. He never dug there again, never planted over it either. It was left untouched, just tall weeds and wildflowers growing freely. Like the earth wanted to cover its own secret. One afternoon his neighbor Tom came by, leaning against his truck as he shouted, "You sure cleaned up nice out here." The farmer smiled. "Rain helped," he said. Tom nodded. "Yeah, looks better than it ever did. Guess those girls finally learned their lesson." "Huh?" The farmer gave a faint nod. "Something like that," he said. Tom chuckled. "Well, good riddance. They were nothing but trouble. Karen too, always thinking she owned everything." He paused. "You heard from her lately?" The farmer shook his head. "Not since that night the sheriff came." Tom whistled. "Weird, ain't it? First her sisters, now her, like the whole family vanished into thin air." The farmer looked out at the field, his eyes unreadable. "Sometimes people dig their own holes," he said quietly. Tom frowned, not sure how to respond. "Well, you take care, old friend," he said. "And hey, that new fence looks sturdy. Maybe you should build one around town too." The farmer chuckled softly. "No fence can fix foolishness," he said. Tom laughed and drove off, leaving behind a trail of dust on the dry road. As the sound faded, the farmer turned back toward his field, the light of the afternoon sun making the soil glow like gold. It was beautiful, but beneath it, he could still feel the heaviness of what rested there, not guilt, but memory. That evening, as the sun sank and the crickets began their song, he sat on his porch, the same spot where he had watched their headlights vanish for the last time. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of the night. Then a sound came from far off, a low rumble, not thunder this time, but the hum of engines. He opened his eyes, scanning the horizon, and sure enough, 2 sets of headlights appeared on the distant road. At first he thought it was another storm of careless drivers, but something about the lights made him uneasy. They moved too slowly, too deliberately. As they got closer, he saw that it was a pair of black government SUVs, clean, polished, official. His jaw tightened slightly when they stopped at his gate. 2 men stepped out, suits, badges flashing under the porch light. "Evening." One of them called out, his voice firm but polite. "You the owner of this property?" The farmer stood. "That's right," he said. "Something wrong?" The taller agent stepped forward. "Name's Agent Lewis, Department of Environmental Affairs. We're following up on a report filed about illegal dumping during the last storm." The farmer raised an eyebrow. "Dumping?" he repeated. "What kind of dumping?" The agent flipped. "Open a small notebook. Someone filed an anonymous tip suggesting you might have buried something hazardous on your land after the floods." The farmer looked calm, too calm. "That's a strange thing to accuse a man of," he said, "especially when it's just dirt and rain out here." The agent smiled faintly. "We just need to confirm. Routine check." The second agent, younger, stood silent, his eyes scanning the property like a hawk. The farmer nodded. "You got a warrant?" The agent handed over a paper, "Signed this morning," he said. "We won't take long." The farmer stepped aside. "Be my guest," he said. Watching as they walked through the gate, the agents spread out, one taking photos, the other marking areas with a handheld scanner that beeped faintly. Every time it passed over the field, the farmer's heart beat slower, steadier, as if daring them to find what wasn't meant to be found. After nearly an hour, the agents regrouped near the fence. The younger one shook his head. Nothing unusual, sir, he said. No signs of chemical residue or disturbed ground. Agent Lewis nodded, jotting down notes. You keep a clean place, he said, glancing at the farmer. The farmer smiled faintly. My father taught me to respect the land, he said. It takes care of you if you take care of it. The agent nodded, folding the warrant. Well, sorry for the intrusion. We get odd tips sometimes. Most of them turn out to be nothing. The farmer nodded. No harm done, he said. But if you figure out who sent it, tell them to worry more about what's under their own feet. The agent chuckled lightly. We'll do that, he said. Then both climbed into their vehicles and drove away. The farmer watched the dust trail vanish down the road before turning back toward his porch. His steps slow, thoughtful. Once inside, he poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window, watching the last light fade from the field. For a moment he thought about what would have happened if they had dug just a little deeper, but then he smiled, the kind of smile only a man who understands patience can wear. He whispered softly, the land doesn't give up what it chooses to keep. And with that, he sat down in his chair, the creak of the wood mixing with the distant hum of the night. Outside, the crickets sang again. The wind moved through the field like a sigh, and the earth stayed still, quiet, and heavy, just the way it liked to be. Months passed, and the valley slipped into a rhythm so peaceful it almost felt unreal. The grass grew tall and golden under the summer sun. The crops flourished like they hadn't in years, and the air smelled clean, calm, unbothered by gossip or law. The farmer's days blended into one another, the kind of slow, satisfying work that made time disappear. But under that stillness, the ground still held its secret, the memory buried deep where no plow could touch it. Sometimes he could feel it when he walked across the field, a faint vibration beneath his boots, like the earth itself. Remembered the night it swallowed the chaos whole. The town had stopped talking by now. New rumors had replaced the old. Karen's family was gone. Her house foreclosed and sold to strangers who didn't ask questions, her name slowly fading into local folklore. The woman who lost everything to her own pride. People would whisper, the sheriff had retired early, too tired of questions without answers, and the HOA had fallen apart, its rules and fines forgotten. The valley had returned to what it once was, quiet land where people minded their business. One afternoon, as the sun burned high and bright, the farmer sat on his porch sharpening a blade when a young man pulled up in a silver truck, dressed neat. Wearing a badge on his chest that read County Surveyor, he stepped out and waved politely. Afternoon, sir. We're updating boundary maps for next year. Mind if I take a few measurements? The farmer squinted against the light. Long as you don't dig, he said. The man laughed lightly. No digging, just mapping. He pulled out his device, scanning the fence line, tracing the edge of the property. Every beep of the machine made the farmer's heart tighten a little, not out of fear, but caution. The surveyor walked along the field, stopping at a spot near the middle. He frowned slightly and tapped his tablet. That's odd, he murmured. The farmer's voice stayed calm. Something wrong? The man shook his head. Not exactly. Just getting strange readings under the soil here. Something metallic, maybe old equipment or pipes. The farmer stood slowly, his gaze steady. This land's been worked for 3 generations. Son, he said evenly. There's bound to be a few buried relics. The man smiled. You're probably right, he said. I'll mark it and move along. The farmer nodded. Good idea. When the surveyor finished and left, the farmer waited until the sound of the truck disappeared over the hill. Then he walked to that very spot, the one that made the machine beep. He knelt slowly, running his hand through the warm dirt. The soil was firm, steady, nothing moved. He smiled faintly. You've held up well, he whispered. Don't let anyone disturb your rest. As the sun sank low, painting the fields orange and red, he stood and looked around. Everything glowed like fire under the light, peaceful, timeless, untouchable. That night, after dinner, he sat by the fireplace reading, the radio playing softly in the background. A local report came on, a brief update. About the old missing persons case, the host's voice calm, almost bored. Authorities have officially closed the Redwood Valley disappearances after no new evidence surfaced. She said, The case remains unsolved. The farmer turned the radio dial down, silence filling the room again. He looked toward the window, where the moonlight poured across the fields, and whispered, "Sometimes no evidence is the best evidence." He rose, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stepped outside. The night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of insects and the soft rustle of the trees. He walked slowly toward the edge of the property, his boots crunching lightly on the dirt. When he reached the center of the field, he stopped, staring down at the ground beneath him. The moon hung large above, casting everything in silver light. The field looked endless, untouched, perfect. He set his glass down on the soil and crouched, resting one hand on the earth. It was solid, warm, alive. "You did what I couldn't," he said softly. "You made them stop." The wind moved across the grass like a whispering voice, carrying faint echoes of laughter that faded almost instantly. He stayed there for a long while, listening to the night, until the moon climbed higher and the world felt still again. When he finally turned to go, he took one last look over his shoulder at the smooth expanse of land, a thin smile crossing his lips. "The land always remembers," he said, "even when people forget." And with that, he walked back toward the porch, his figure swallowed by the dark. Behind him, the wind swept gently across the earth, brushing away his footprints, leaving the ground smooth, clean, and quiet once more. Only the soft sound of the night remained. The land at peace with the justice it had buried deep beneath its roots, never to be disturbed again.